Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the MCU Perspectives, and today we're going to be discussing the 31st film to be released as part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania. And just a heads up before I actually get to talking about anything, we may get interrupted at certain points by my dog, Chindy, because she likes to occasionally pop in and see what I'm doing, so I just want to give you a heads up in case I end up pausing this vlog for any reason, yeah, there's that. But anyway, Ant-Man and the Wasp. So, before I talk about this film, I should probably talk about the previous Ant-Man films that have come before. And of course, let's start with Ant-Man. The first Ant-Man film, I thought was a pretty good movie, a nice little heist movie with some nice action that took advantage of the whole situation. Had some really cool effects and some pretty impressive fight scenes. Its biggest problem was that it felt a little rushed in certain areas, and I thought the villain was kind of dumb. But overall, that was a pretty good movie and definitely worth your time to watch. The second film, Ant-Man and the Wasp, I admit I felt was a step down in terms of quality, but I would still kind of give it a steady thumbs up. I did like the villain, and I did like the effects, and it was cool seeing Hope Van Dyne take on the mantle of the Wasp, but in some regards the plot felt a little stupid. It felt like it relied too much on hijinks in certain parts, and in quite a few areas it felt a little too cluttered, and I didn't like that. So, yeah, I did. So, yeah, while I still liked it, I thought it was a major step down from what we got in the first film, but now we have this one, Quantumania, and this is the one that people were kind of the most weary of. Like, from the outset, this film had a lot of, I don't want to say negativity around it, but enough cautiousness, if that makes any sense. From the very first time people saw the poster, people were a bit leery about it, especially seeing the costumes for the main heroes. The villain felt like he was someone that would be too big for something like Ant-Man and so forth, and even when the first trailer was dropped, people were kind of picking it apart, saying it kind of looked too similar to other films, specifically the trailers for Shark Boy and Lava Girl. So people were a bit more cautious about it, as they felt it would be like a big CGI thing, that there wouldn't be a lot of creativity, just blah blah blah. It felt like people were just didn't look like that. People were just kind of leery of the whole thing, and when the film came out, sadly that didn't go away, as critical reception for the movie, well, they named it rotten. It's like Eternals before the critical score was negative, but also like Eternals, the audience score was positive. So it kind of made me a bit curious about it. I was still excited for the movie, and I was ready to go in and start enjoying myself, but I was curious where I would fall. Would this be a movie that I would wind up hating and become the second MCU film that I ultimately disliked? Or would I end up agreeing with the audience? Or would I be somewhere in the middle, like I was with Eternals, where I like it, but I can see a lot of the problems with it? So I was curious about it, and when the film did come out, I did go out and see it, and I did remember liking it, but has my opinion changed with this second viewing? Well, let's find out. And two things. One, at the time that I'm doing this vlog, the film has only been out in theaters for 2 weeks, so if you haven't seen Quantumania yet and don't want to go in spoiled, turn away now, because I'm going to be spoiling the whole thing rotten. I'm not going to be leaving any stone unturned. I'm going to give every detail that I can, and I'm not going to be sparing it, and I'm not going to be cutting anything out. So, turn away now if you don't want to go in spoiled. And on top of that, in preparation for seeing Quantumania, I wound up watching one of the Disney Plus Marvel shows, specifically Loki. I'll explain why when I actually get to it, but if you haven't seen that show yet and don't want to go into that spoiled, I just want to give you a heads up because I'm also going to be spoiling that too. So, there you go. But anyway, are we good? Alright, let's get to the long-ass spoilerific plot summary, and for starters, let's check in with Scott Lang, and he's actually doing well for himself. It turns out after the end of Endgame, he essentially became a celebrity. Pretty much everybody knows his name. He's become a famous hero that helped the Avengers save the world. He's got his face plastered on a bunch of merchandise and crap. He wrote a book about his time being a superhero and what it means to him. He's got fans who all want to see him. A bunch of people who stop him on the street because they want to take pictures of him with their dogs, and this one guy that runs a coffee shop keeps giving him free coffee because he thinks he's Spider-Man, which is funny. On top of that, in his home life, he's actually doing a lot better. He's managed to reconnect with his daughter, and he's actually he's pretty much part of the Pym family now, as he's still dating Hope. They are still enjoying themselves, and on top of that, in the world of the Pyms, Hope's doing well. She's actually managed to regain control of her family's company, and using the Pym particles, she's actually managed to make a difference in the world, as she's contributed to many humanitarian agencies and aids and helped kind of rebuild the world. So she's doing very well for herself, and she and Scott are still happy. But of course, the well-built structures still have the flaws, and one of those things is Cassie. Since Cassie is now older, since there was a 5-year gap between Ant-Man and the Wasp and, well, Endgame, it does show she's kind of wanted to follow in her daddy's footsteps, as she's kind of become she's started trying to fight for social liberties and so forth. Case in point, while Scott is in the middle of a book reading, he gets a call from jail, asking him to come pick up his daughter, as she was arrested during a protest. She was arrested during a protest as police officers were trying to break up a homeless camp made up from people who apparently lost their homes in the blip. Which, kind of like that little detail that apparently there are homeless camps, which makes sense. A 5-year gap, people would try and adapt around it. When suddenly people come back, they're not going to have a place to live. So that actually, I think, makes sense. I think that makes sense to do, but. Yeah, Scott's not exactly happy that his daughter is getting involved in this. And while he is proud of her for wanting to make the world a better place and do good, he also wants her to have a normal life, which she counters by the fact that her life hasn't really been normal since her dad became Ant-Man. On top of that, well, she's kind of a little ashamed of her dad. She still loves him and still likes that he's back in her life. But apparently, after the events of Endgame, Scott really hasn't been doing a lot in the superhero business. He's just kind of, which, in a way, I kind of get. After all, he helped save the world, but he was trapped in the quantum realm for a while, and he's still got a lot to catch up on. So, of course, I think he probably would deserve a break at this point. So, I'm going to cut him a little bit of slack in that regard. But with that being said, Cassie does still want to do good. She wants to make the world a better place, and while Scott is objecting to how she's doing it, he is still trying to be proud of her in that regard. And so, after Scott and Hope end up bailing Cassie out of jail, they do stop by the Pym residence, and they pretty much just sit down for a family dinner. Which, yeah, we also see that Hank and Janet are living happily together. They're enjoying themselves, and yeah, they're also kind of calming down. But a little thing that's going on is that Hope has at every opportunity tried to talk to Janet about her time in the quantum realm, but every time the topic is brought up, Janet just kind of skirts around it and doesn't want to talk about it, just wanting to live in the present, so to speak, which even the Pyms find a bit suspect, but they don't push it. However, during this little family dinner, Scott ends up learning that Cassie has actually been doing this whole hero thing for a lot longer than he's been aware of, as apparently she has gone to jail at least one other time, and while the rest of the family tries writing it off, Scott is justifiably a little upset about this, especially when his daughter does throw the whole, "at least I'm doing something," back in his face. Or no, better yet, she says, "at least we've been doing something." At which point, Scott learns that apparently Hank, Janet, and yes, Hope have been encouraging Cassie and helping her behind the scenes and behind Scott's back. As such, once that comes out, Cassie decides, okay, maybe we should let him in on this. As such, they bring Scott down to their little lab in the basement, and it turns out they've been working on quite a bit of stuff. Excuse me a sec. Sorry about that, puppy-related shenanigans. Anyway. So, they end up bringing Scott down to the lab, and it turns out they've been actually building some bunch of stuff in his absence. They've been building a bunch of stuff down below, including making all of Hank Sands more super intelligent, and which they've been using to essentially just continue furthering technology in their own regard. But one project that Cassie has been working on is a subatomic. Hold on, I wrote it down. It is a subatomic Hubble telescope, which is supposed to be able to give them a view of the quantum realm. Which, when Janet hears about this, she asks why they didn't consult her about it, because apparently she didn't know about this. But apparently this was part of the reason why Hope was probing her. She did want her help, but she never budged. But pretty much, the telescope is supposed to be able to map out the quantum realm and give them a view from their realm. So no one will have to go in there. They'll be able to map it out, figure out all the ins and outs and so forth, which part of the reason why Cassie built it is because, well, Scott was trapped in the quantum realm for 5 years, and if she had something like this from the get-go, she could have used it to probably find him. But so which yeah, Scott's actually proud of his daughter for this. But tensions start rising when she explains how the telescope works. Essentially, what it does is that it sends a signal down to the quantum realm, which will bounce back up to them and essentially map it out. Think of it like subatomic sonar. And the instant Janet hears how that works, well, she starts kind of freaking out a little as she begins demanding that Cassie shut the thing off. Shut it off now. And they're like, what's going on? But as she keeps pleading, no, everyone's like, hey, what are you doing? What's going on? Until eventually she just cuts the power to the thing herself. At which point everyone looks at her and asks, okay, what the hell was that? And so Janet starts saying, okay, maybe there's something I should have told you. But before she can start talking, the telescope activates as it suddenly releases this weird blue light that suddenly transforms into what I can essentially call a little mini black hole that begins sucking everything in the lab into it. And while Scott, Cassie, Hope, and the Pims do their best to try and hold on for dear life, sadly, one by one, they and the rest of the lab are sucked into this little wormhole, with Hank and Janet getting sucked in first, with Hope flying in after them, and eventually Cassie too, as she's holding onto her father's legs, but sadly her grip isn't good enough as she gets sucked in too, so Scott goes in after her. And as a result, we end up getting two separate teams in the quantum realm, as Hope manages to catch up to her parents, and Scott manages to catch up with Cassie. But sadly, because of how things work, they don't end up in the same locations, though it does lead to a very nice effect as we see everyone shrinking down into the quantum realm, as we see them going through strange atoms, flying through debris, through all these weird, trippy fields. At one point, we see the ant farm with the super intelligent ants gets broken open as they get spread out across God knows where. But eventually, both teams do end up in their own personal spots, as Scott managed to get his Ant-Man suit on and grow large in order to catch Cassie before they hit solid ground, whereas Janet, well, she donned her Wasp out before she flew in anyway, and managed to grab her parents before they crashed as well. But unfortunately, like I said though, this unfortunately puts both teams in different areas of the quantum realm. But whereas before, the last time we saw the quantum realm, it was constantly all phasey and shifty and alien, this time, the quantum realm looks different, as Scott and Cassie find themselves in what looks like a anti-grav canyon, as they are on walkways that are just kind of suspended and floating with air. They can see structures just floating about in different areas, weird, strange red colors going across the sky, and as with Hope, Hank, and Janet, they're in a strange forest, so to speak, and Hank is just like surprised by all this, because the last time he went to the quantum realm, it did not look like this, and every single time he's tried to experiment in the quantum realm when he tried to get Janet back, he never got anything like this. And Janet's explanation for this is because, well, it's because he can never break through. He can never break through the subatomica, which is supposed to be like the barrier around the quantum realm. And the thing is, the quantum realm isn't just a tiny universe. It's supposed to be an entirely different realm, existing outside of time and space, with its own rules and landscapes and layouts. And in her own words, it's essentially just a universe underneath our own. It's actually pretty interesting. And yes, this also leads to one of the problems the film usually has, that the effects look cheesy, which, yeah, rewatching it, I did kind of notice that. But with that being said, hold on one second. Again, sorry about that. But anyway, yeah, the effects do look kind of cheesy, especially when they're trying to juxtapose the real-life actors against the CG. It really does look like they're just being overimposed on them. But with that being said, I love the designs of the quantum realm and how it just varied and interesting it looks. It all looks so alien yet mystifying. It looks so creative and strange, but it's all very nice and pretty to look at. So I'm kind of willing to forgive the cornier CGI for the honestly pretty impressive designs on everything, which do make it look like an entirely other world. One that you can just explore to your heart's content, with just as many various and unique ecosystems as one would expect in a different world. But it's because of these differing ecosystems that kind of causes a problem as both groups end up encountering their own little problems, as Scott and Cassie, while they're out kind of walking around, encounter some of the local wildlife of the quantum realm. Specifically, a giant what I'm going to call a giant sun jellyfish, which soon gets eaten by a giant gelatinous monstrosity that nearly consumes Scott and Cassie. Thankfully, they're ultimately saved by this, I want to say, robot man with a laser for a head, but he's part of a group that ends up capturing the pair as well. However, they're not exactly unfriendly either, as while they do end up capturing Cassie and Scott, they don't end up harming them. Instead, they end up having the pair drink this weird red ooze that allows the pair to understand everybody, and pretty much what they want to know is who the hell Scott and Cassie are, because they've never seen them before, and they're dressed weirdly. Scott in a superhero outfit, Cassie in her civilian garb, and pretty much Scott and Cassie confirm that they don't know what the hell's going on, where they are, and so on. And one of the people in the group is a mind reader who I think is named Quasi, but don't quote me on that. And he's able to confirm that they're telling the truth. But that doesn't make any of these people any less wary about them, because even if they're not spies, they know that they came from the sky, which means that he will still be after them. Of course, Scott and Cassie have no idea who he is, but everyone here just calls him the Conqueror, which kind of brings us back to the Pims and what's going on with them, as once the trio of them landed in the quantum realm, Janet wound up pushing Hank and Hope underneath, I'm just going to call a mushroom tree, as something flew overhead that was scanning the area. Thankfully, because they were covered up by a mushroom, they ultimately went under its radar. But Janet makes it Janet says that they have to make it a priority of finding Scott and Cassie and getting the hell out of here. As such, they end up making their way out of the little forest, which allows us to see more terrain from the quantum realm, which again looks really cool, very curved desert, just having its own little thing. And they encounter their own brand of locals, essentially. And once they encounter him, Janet ends up meeting up with one of the members who, after getting into a tussle with him where she ends up cutting off his arm, which he regrows, they actually manage to get chummy with each other, and he manages to hitch them a ride in the form of this flying basilisk thing or whatever. And from this, they're able to ride this to, I'm guessing, I want to call this super alien dock, where a bunch of people are just kind of moving about, socializing and so forth, and it allows the group to see more of the locals of the quantum realm. And what I love is Hank is just all in awe of everything and everyone there. So and especially one guy who looks like broccoli. But as they go along, they manage to make their way to what essentially is a bar where the trio end up taking their own little batches of that red ooze that allow them to understand everyone. And it turns out the reason Janet brought them here is because there's someone in the quantum realm that she thinks can help them. Someone named, I think his name is Krylar, but don't quote me on that. I know Bill Murray plays him. His name is Krylar. And apparently there is someone in this bar that knows him. So she managed to find that person and says she wants to have a meetup with Krylar, and sure enough, he quickly answers the call as he comes on his own ship and is all happy and chummy to see Janet, as apparently they were intimate in their younger years, because as Janet later puts it, she was gone for 30 years and she's got needs, and apparently Bill Murray provides. So good on her. Good on them, I guess. But she did tell Krylar about her family, though her family was not wary of Krylar, and pretty much, Janet just starts wanting to ask Krylar if he knows anything about where Scott and Cassie are. But he's kind of getting a little tight-lipped. All he really wants to do is just hang out, talk with them, order some food, get some drinks, just enjoy themselves and all that. Which, Janet's not exactly all for this, but immediately the conversation gets derailed as a bunch of guards come walking in, and it turns out the Krylar is setting them up. It turns out here's the thing. It turns out Krylar was a member of a resistance that Janet was a part of to fight this conqueror, so to speak. But after Janet left during the events of Ant-Man and the Wasp, that ultimately Krylar wound up turning traitor and joined sides with the Conqueror, because in Krylar's own words, he can be very persuasive. I'll come back to that later, trust me. Hold on 1 second. Dog, open the door. Anyway, so as a result, he says that he pretty much starts grilling Janet about why she left. She just left them. Do you feel guilty about what you did? And so on and so forth. And clearly Janet is feeling guilty. Hold on 1 second. Again, she came right back in. She's such a little rascal, and now I'm petting her belly. Anyway, like I said, Krylar is still grilling Janet about all this, and she pretty much, but it's clear she does feel kind of guilt. Like, whatever he's asking her about, she clearly does feel guilty, but she is still wondering where Scott and Cassie are. But ultimately, Krylar doesn't really care, as he says that he wants Janet, and he's going to be taking Hank and Hope with. He's going to be taking Hank and Hope with because she wants them, so he does too. But in regards to Scott and Cassie, well, it turns out that the Conqueror already knows where they are, and he sent someone to get them. Someone that they calls the Hunter. Janet has no idea who it is, but Krylar describes it as a being, one who is neither organic nor machine. In his own words, its official title is Mechanized Organism Designed Only for Killing. Yeah, you can't tell by my smile. I love this guy. But pretty much after this, Krylar feels that he's gotten everything he needs out of them and orders them to take them. But at this point, Hope goes F that and just rips and goes into battle mode, as she was wearing a hood before, but she was wearing her Wasp outfit underneath. So immediately everybody goes on the offensive, fighting off more of the guards that show up, as well as Krylar and his men. And eventually, after a bit of hijinks and making a squid from a drink grow and trash the place and almost kill Krylar, they manage to gain control of Hank, Janet, and Hope manage to gain control of Krylar's ship and make a run for it. And in the meantime, Scott and Cassie, back with the people they met before, well, they want more answers about what the heck's going on with the Conqueror. And pretty much one of the people in the tribe, this lady whose name I do not remember, explains that he is someone that managed to completely conquer their entire universe. In fact, part of the reason why these people are living the way they are is because he's little by little taking control of their homes, and sadly they don't have anywhere else to go. And while they've tried fighting back, well, resistance is futile, as they say. So sadly, they're just doing everything they can to stay alive. And they want Scott, and part of the reason why they want Scott and Cassie gone is because they know that the Conqueror wants them, and that'll draw undue attention unto them, so they just want to get rid of them. Cassie wants to help these people, as she thinks that they're being impoverished, they need to do something, but Scott, again, wants to just get out of there, because, well, they're in a strange place they know nothing about, against an enemy they know nothing about, and again, this is his daughter. His main priority at this point isn't, we need to help these people, his main priority is, we just need to go. This isn't our fight, we need to leave, which, again, I kind of understand that. Well, I can understand Cassie wanting to be the hero in the situation and wanting to help these people. At the same time, like I said, they're in an unfamiliar situation with no way of knowing what the hell's going on, and even if they wanted to fight against the Conqueror, how? How would they fight him? How would they stop him? Their biggest gimmick is that they can grow and shrink. That's not going to be a lot to take down a guy who's pretty much ruling the place. Yeah, I'd love to see you try that, Cassie. I'd love to see you try. But bottom line, since Scott is prioritizing Cassie and the Pims over helping these people, Cassie is a little disappointed in him. However, that doesn't really go very far, as immediately the Conqueror's forces arrive and start laying waste to everyone, shooting anybody they can while also capturing prisoners. As such, Scott and Cassie try making a run for it, but in the midst of the battle, they do end up seeing some of the people in this little commune being attacked, and this does finally prompt the pair of them to fight, which, yeah, I should probably brought this up. Cassie's got her own suit now, which I do kind of like the suit. It's clearly a little inspired by her father's suit, as it has more design elements more familiar to Ant-Man. It has apparently sneakers to it, which is a little silly, but I'm cool with. And it just feels like a purple, smaller female version of the Ant-Man costume, which I dig. I like it. I think it looks cool. So At this point, she ends up pulling it out, and so Scott and Cassie end up working together to try and fight off more of the guards, but they're still being told, you gotta get out of here, you guys are a problem, we can't let you get, we can't have you keep coming, we can't have him coming after us. But as they're going along, Quasi, again, I think that's I don't remember his name, so I swear to God, I think I'm getting it wrong. He senses something because he can read minds and tells them they need to get out of here. As things suddenly go quiet, and we soon see the hunter that Krylar mentioned flying in. As we see it pulling out buzzsaws, seeing it pulling out laser guns, and as people are prepared for it, it ends up killing one of the guards that is supposed to be sentrying outside of the commune's camp, or flying through a building and causing it to blow up. And in the resulting rubble and dust, we see this thing flying in as Scott and Cassie get a look at it. And as it comes closer, we see a menacing face looking at them. A giant bulbous head with a jewel on its forehead and a snarling metal face with little arms and legs and weapons coming out of its sides. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the first MCU appearance of MODOK. And to go on a bit of a tangent here, actually, you know what? I'll save that for after his identity is revealed, because it turns out MODOK is someone that Scott knows. And once MODOK sees Scott, he says, "It's been a while, Scott." And when Scott asks who the hell he is, he says, our fates have been tied together, you and I. At which point he rants about how the last time they fought, he took everything from him, he ruined him, and basically with enough context clues, Scott figures out who it is under that face mask. It's Darren Cross, the villain from the first Ant-Man movie, Yellow Jacket. The guy who I thought was kind of a weenie villain. Yep, this is what happened to him. It turns out that when Scott screwed with his suit and at the end of Ant-Man, it wound up sending him to the quantum realm, but he was deformed to the point where he literally was just nothing but a huge head with the tiny arms and legs. It turns out the Conqueror found him, and essentially he transformed him into this, turning him into one of his soldiers. And the thing is, I love it. I'm not going to deny it. I love this because here's the thing: people did not like that this was the MODOK we got in the movie, because the face mask has come off and he's just pretty much a giant bulbous head with kind of a stretched out face. So does look silly. But the thing is, have you seen MODOK? MODOK in the books is literally a giant grotesque face with pursed lips and hair. He's one of those villains that is both legitimately threatening but also kind of silly. That's hard to take a character like that seriously, but part of the reason why MODOK is such a threatening being is because he does have such a wide array of weapons at his disposal for killing. He is adept at killing. He's great at killing, but he's got a short temper. He thinks he's bigger shit than he really is. He's just a psychotic nutball. And quite frankly, I think Darren Cross is a perfect choice for MODOK, because he's also that way. When I watched Ant-Man, this guy was just petty. He was smarmy. He was a know-it-all who thought he was better than he really was, and that attitude carries over into his appearance as MODOK. And in that regard, I think he's perfect, because when you have such a short fuse of a man in control of this killing machine, and just have him be so arrogant that yes, I'm the true villain here, and all that BS. It works, especially when he gets angry when people don't give a shit about him. Because there's a running gag throughout the movie that every time someone sees him, they're like, "Darren, what the hell happened to you?" Or he gets interrupted when he's trying to go on a villainous speech about how he's been transformed into this creature, how it's all Scott's fault, and blah blah blah. Look, I'm just gonna say this right now. What's the problem here? Is it because he looks silly? Again, it's freaking MODOK. Are you mad that he doesn't look more threatening? The thing is, MODOK was a freaking head. He was a big head with little stubby arms and legs. He had all these various killing implements at his disposal. But for the love of God, it's hard to still take him seriously, is what I'm saying. That doesn't mean he can't be threatening. It does not mean that he can't be a genuine villain. But when your gimmick for your villain is that he's a floating head with stubby arms and legs, you're gonna be laughing. I'm not going to deny it. I think the only time that MODOK has actually been able to look and sound intimidating and make it work was in the Avengers video game. You know, the thing that nobody likes. Although apparently MODOK was done very well in that. Look, I'm looking up clips. It's actually pretty cool. But bottom line, that's one version. Every other version of MODOK is one of those villains that skirts the line between genuinely silly and stupid and genuinely threatening and vicious. And this version of MODOK is no exception, because Darren Cross is still just as petty, just as smarmy, and has just as much of a short fuse as he did in Ant-Man. And like I said, put that in this tiny little killing machine, and it makes for someone that you don't want to get on the bad side of. So, yes, I do like this version of MODOK. You're free to disagree with me. You can think this version is dumb compared to other versions, but I'm standing my ground here. I like this version of MODOK. I think it can stand his ground alongside any other version of the character. So, there you go. Point is, he has a grudge against Scott, and sadly, with MODOK's added appearance, he ends up tipping the scales of battle in the Conqueror's favor, and Scott and Cassie are captured. And it's at this point where we kind of cut back to the Pyms as Hank and Hope finally sit Janet down and want to know what the hell is going on, and Janet finally comes clean. And it's here where I'm going to divert a little bit and finally start talking about Loki. Because, well, this actually has something to do with Loki. So, let's talk about that. So, remember at the end of Avengers Endgame, or during Avengers Endgame, while the Avengers were jumping through time and were trying to gather the Infinity Stones, but when they got to the Battle of New York, they wound up losing the Tesseract, aka the Space Stone, when the Loki of that time managed to grab it and teleport away. Well, it turns out the Loki series actually shows where that version of Loki went. As it turns out, he wound up teleporting to the desert, and upon arriving in the desert, he was intercepted by a few people. A police force of time known as the Time Variance Authority, or the TVA. And the TVA's job was that they were supposed to protect the integrity of the sacred timeline, aka the aka the main MCU timeline. The reason for this was because a long time ago, there was a great multiversal war as you know about the whole multiverse, there's an infinite number of realities all branch off from different decisions that can and cannot be made. Every possible reality that could exist can exist. Well, apparently a long time ago, there was a great multiversal war that led to a lot of casualties and entire realities being destroyed. However, ultimately, what stopped the war was when a group of beings called the Time Masters managed to take the remaining timelines and coalesce them into one pure timeline, the sacred timeline as they call it. And since Avengers Endgame showed us that time travel essentially operates on multiverse theory, that you can go back, change anything, and your present won't be changed, well, that's where the TVA comes in, as if at any point along the timeline something occurs that will cause a branch in the timeline, aka lead to the creation of a parallel universe, they go in and essentially snip the roots, essentially cut off the branch. And how they do that is that they go to whatever person wound up making the alternate decision, or as they call it, a nexus event. Sorry, I paused to try and remember it. They go to the person that's a nexus event, they pull them out of the time stream, and then essentially reset the timeline so that it reverts back to how it was actually supposed to be. In the meantime, this person is brought to their grounds, put on trial, and is either pruned or transformed into a new or reset themselves, which I suspect means becoming part of the TVA, because big twist in there is that everyone there was also one of these people, or as they call them, variants, but that's another thing altogether. And so, because the Loki from Endgame had broken the sacred timeline, had done things he wasn't supposed to do, he was considered a he was considered a problem, and so they wound up taking him back to the TVA, but rather than have him pruned or reset or just erased, one of the members of the TVA, a man named Mobius, wound up vouching for Loki, saying that he thinks that they could use his help as they were having problems with another variant. In this case, another Loki, a female version of the character who went by the name Sylvie, who apparently who had been running from the TVA for a good chunk of her life, as her Nexus event happened when she was still a child. So yeah, she's been running for a long time and holds a hefty grudge against the TVA. Loki does agree to these terms just to save himself, especially after he learns what happens to his main universe counterpart, but he eventually does end up meeting Sylvie, and they eventually end up forming a kind of relationship which is admittedly a little creepy since they're two versions of the same character, but ultimately both work together to try and find the source of the TVA and ultimately take it down. So, there you go. And this is where things kind of come to a head and what this ties it to, this film. Because eventually, as Loki and Sylvie continue diving deeper and deeper, they soon discover that the Time Masters are not even real. They're literally just automatons that work for the true mastermind behind the TVA. And the true mastermind is a being who lives at the end of time, like the very end of time. And because of this, he has gained the nickname of He Who Remains. And when Loki and Sylvie go to confront him, he's just kind of a very excitable, kind of very sociable man who clearly has a few screws loose, but pretty much he was expecting Loki and Sylvie to come because he knew how everything was going to play out, but but pretty much when Loki and Sylvie do confront him, he does explain why he set up the TVA and why he's trying to stop the multiverse from existing. Because case into the point, he's the Conqueror. Or more specifically, a variant of the Conqueror. You see, the big multiverse war that caused the TVA to exist in the first place was actually jump-started by him. Specifically, once upon a time in the 31st century, a brilliant scientist wound up discovering the existence of the multiverse, which led him to meeting alternate versions of themselves. And in the beginning, they all got along really well, because, well, they're all different versions of the same guy. Of course they love each other. But the thing is, some versions of this guy eventually wound up getting greedy. As some of them were not so nice, and when they learned of the existence of the multiverse, they didn't see it as, oh, we should expand our ideas and share universal knowledge. No, they saw it as an opportunity to control, to conquer. And from that's what led to the multiversal war, as various versions of He Who Remains continued duking it out across time and space to either defend their own universes or conquer others, which is where He Who Remains came in. As in all the interdimensional mishaps, a creature was birthed called Alioth, which was literally a living tempest who could eat entire realities and timelines. And so, using Alioth, He Who Remains was able to end the multiversal war by pretty much cutting off all the branches and erasing everything else. But to ensure that it wouldn't happen again, that's why he set up the TVA. As with the TVA, he can snip off the branches of all these alternate timelines and ensure it's all one stable timeline. Because as long as it's only one timeline, he can stop any other versions of him from existing and ultimately stop the multiversal war. Now, in the end, this failed because after a certain point, he did stop knowing what was going on, and he gave Loki and Sylvie alternatives that they can take over the TV and keep the whole operation going, or just kill him and allow the multiverse to exist again, which will eventually jumpstart a new war because of multiple versions. Sylvie wound up opting to kill He Who Remains while tricking Loki while sending Loki back to the TVA, which did end up spawning a new multiverse, and clearly showcased that, yeah, killing him did screw with something, because when Loki returns to the TVA, he goes to the Mobius and tries warning him about what he saw, that there's going to be a great multiversal war, that they need to prepare for this, and Mobius' response was, wait, who are you? Wait, come on, just calm down. Who are you again? And when Loki realizes it, when he looks to the Grand Hall of the TVA, where once there were statues of the Time Masters, there now stands a statue of He Who Remains. Or, as he is known to many Marvel fans, Kang the Conqueror. Yep. That is our big bad for this movie. And Yeah, we're starting to see that other versions of Kang are beginning to pop up across the multiverse, as it turns out that the reason why Janet is feeling so guilty is because she knows Kang. It turns out that one version of Kang, well, he was aware of what his other selves were doing and how their actions were affecting the multiverse, and so he made it his mission, and so he decided to make it his mission to essentially take them out, prune the timeline, and erase what he considered the bad world, so that good could come out of it. And as a result, he pretty much went from world to world and conquered them, taking down any other version of himself he can find and erasing entire timelines. Unfortunately for him, the other versions of himself wound up catching up to him and banished him to the quantum realm, as they managed to throw him there with his ship and sabotage the power source so that he couldn't go anywhere. Which is where he ran into Janet, as he wound up crashing into the quantum realm while she was during the 30-year gap that she was trapped in there. And so Janet wound up seeing him crash, and they wound up going to meet, and they wound up seeing, and when she went to investigate, they wound up helping each other fend off some creatures in the quantum realm, and Kang managed to get on Janet's good side by telling her that his ship could go anywhere in the multiverse, and since, well, Janet was trapped in the quantum realm, a ship that can traverse the multiverse is something that she'd be very much interested in getting. Excuse me one second. Again, puppy stuff. But anyway, yeah. So, as a result, Janet and Kang wound up working together to try and restore the core, and while they kept having repeated failures, in the time they were working on it, they wound up building up a friendship, as Janet wound up opening up to Kang about how she regrets, the last time she saw her daughter, she told her she'd be right back, and, well, she thinks that was a lie, since now she doesn't think she'll ever see her again. Well, Kang talks about how he sees time as kind of a prison, how it doesn't operate the way you think it does, but it is a prison, and it can change you if you let it. But he pretty much tells her that once they get this thing finished, he can get her home, and she'll be able to see her daughter again. That, from her perspective, it'll be like she never left, which is actually a pretty nice sentiment, and actually is pretty good, and pretty good. But eventually, their efforts do bear fruit, as they do manage to get the core of the ship up and running again. As such, they get everything loaded up. They turn the ship on. But the thing is, part of the ship's design is that it's supposed to link with the mind of its user, and since Kang got into the driver's seat of this thing, once it turned on, Janet wanted making contact with the engine, and she managed to finally see inside his head. And she was horrified by what she saw, as, like I said, this version of Kang wanted to win the war by essentially erasing entire realities and conquering anything that stood in his way. And so the instant she sees all this, yeah, she's justifiably is terrified of this. At which point, once this happens, you can kind of see Kang's demeanor shift a little, as he kind of starts getting a little bit more condescending. And it's like, what's wrong? But at the same time, yeah. It's clear he is still planning to keep his promise to Janet. He'll get her back home, and she'll be able to live her life and be with her family in peace. But Janet also knows that if he has this ship and gets out of here, he's gonna be doing a lot of damage. Which, yeah, Kang kind of mocks her a little and says, well, how are you gonna stop me? As he fully turns on the ship and gains access to his technology again, as he manages to get his suit on, which, yeah, I think it actually does look pretty cool. It looks grandiose, like that of an emperor. So I think it works. It definitely fits for Kang. But ultimately, how Janet tries to stop him is that she manages to grab the engine for the ship and makes a run for it. But unfortunately, she doesn't manage to get far before Kang makes chase, and sadly, he is too strong for her. His technology is far more advanced than hers, and unfortunately, in a fair fight, she was outclassed. So she instead decides to do the next best thing she can think of: cut him off from the core entirely, as she ends up smacking the core with a bunch of those little pin particle grenades, and causes the thing to pretty much explode. As such, in the midst of the explosion, Janet managed to run away, and, well, Kang is just kind of left to lick his wounds. Unfortunately, though, while she did cut him off from being able to escape from the quantum realm, she did still restore enough of his power to pretty much get him back on his feet. So since he's now trapped in this other world, now with access to his technology again, he decides to do what he does best and conquer, which is where the whole resistance came in. As for the next few years, Janet pretty much did her best to fend off Kang while helping others fight off his forces, doing everything in her power to try and undo the mistakes she did, but with Kang constantly on her coattails because he kind of needs her, which is what led to this entire trap. As it turns out, when Cassie sent a signal down to the quantum realm, Kang's forces intercepted it. Specifically, MODOK intercepted it and was able to use it to essentially do a pullback as he pulled everyone into the quantum realm. And the reason why Kang needs them here is because he still wants his core, as he needs that to power his ship and to get the hell out of here. But the only way he can get the core is if he shrinks it back down, and since it was Pym particles that made the thing explode in the first place, he needs Pym particles again to make it shrink. And unfortunately, he now has access to them, as he now has Scott and Cassie. And as such, once the trio realizes this after Janet finally finishes her story, they realize they gotta get a move on because, well, Kang's now got a head start on them. Which, going back to Scott and Cassie, they finally do have an encounter with Kang, and it continues kind of furthering along him as an actually legitimately good villain, as when he encounters Scott, like, he calls him first by name, and when Scott says he's an Avenger, Kang's like, an Avenger? Which one? Did I kill you before? Are you the one with the hammer? It's like, no, that's Thor. We have similar body types, you can get confused, but... Sorry, popcorn. But pretty much, Kang at first tries to make a deal with Scott, as MODOK has told him that he's apparently the pretty good thief, and what he wants him to do is that he wants him to go into the core of the engine and essentially shrink it down, as he tells him that he can use it to get him, as that he needs it to be able to get out of this place, he thinks that Scott will be able to, and if Scott helps him, then he'll be able to send Scott and his daughter on their way as well. Of course, Scott knows that Kang is more fruity than a bowl of Fruit Loops, so he tells him no, and, well, Kang doesn't exactly like being told no, as he immediately tells Scott, fine, if you don't do what I want, then I'm gonna kill your daughter in front of you, and then make you relive that moment for the rest of your days until you beg me to kill you. Using his suit, he ends up essentially levitating Scott and Cassie in the air in their respective cells, because they're in a cell. Like I said, they're captured and they're in cells. And he begins kind of crushing them little by little, and he starts making Cassie suffer. And until eventually Scott says, "Okay, fine, I'll do it. Just let her go." As such, Kang makes good on his word and drops Cassie, and so he lets Scott out of his cell, and Scott does pretty much give Kang. He scathingly tells Kang, never touch her again. At which point, but pretty much they now got what they need from him, so they take him to they pretty much do take him to the core, and they pretty much tell Scott that what he needs to do is that he needs to go shrink down into the center of the core and hit it with a bunch of those grenade things. As if they can hit it with enough if they can shrink it back down, then they can get back to normal. But the thing is, that's going to be easier said than done, as getting Scott in is just going to be the beginning. Once he's inside, the longer he's in there, the more his mind will be frayed. So he needs to work fast. And after getting a hug from his daughter, who apologizes for getting them into this mess, Scott. Which also leads to a genuinely nice line, which I want to see if I can find it. I know I wrote it down. Hold on, I wrote it down here. Hold on. She says she messed up, and and Scott responds with, "My whole life happened because I messed up. The only thing I didn't mess up was you." And he tells her he loves her before he jumps into the core and starts shrinking down, which again does lead to some nice little trippy imagery before he eventually ends up in what they call the Eye of the Storm, the center of the core. And in it, he sees the core, and he's ready, and at first he thinks it's going to be a simple matter. That he just needs to run in, shrink it down, and all good. But it turns out when you cause a core, when you cause a core that for a ship that's supposed to be able to traverse the multiverse to explode, the after effects can be kind of trippy when you go in the blast radius, because as Scott tries moving forward, he begins splitting apart. And the reason for that is because he's currently in the middle of what they call a probability storm. And what a probability storm does is that it can make every possible version of you that can exist in this moment will exist in this moment. So Scott begins just multiplying more and more and more, and all the versions of Scott have absolutely no idea what the hell is going on, and the more versions pop up, the more confused they get. And so pretty much MODOK just tells him, just keep going, or things are just gonna keep getting worse. And so, hold on again, puppy stuff. But anyway, yeah, things do keep getting. MODOK tells him things are gonna keep getting worse, and yeah, things do get worse as one of the Ant-Men decides to just grow big to try and get to the core, and upon growing, he gets sliced up. Like, apparently growing in a probability storm is not good for it's not very good, as it ends up splitting him apart. As such, the remaining Scots end up pretty much floundering as they all run around just not knowing what the hell to do, and so Scott realizes he just has to make a run for it. Which, oh yeah, little money thing, one of the versions of Scott is a version of him that still works at Baskin-Robbins. Don't know why. Which, another funny thing I forgot to mention, apparently as part of his celebrity status, he was named the Employee of the Century at the Baskin-Robbins he used to work at. So, yeah, it's a thing. But anyway, yeah, getting off topic. Scott does try making a run for the core, but he keeps splitting up into more and more and more of him, and sadly, the number of him just keeps growing as all of them have absolutely no idea what they're doing and are just, well, so they're not coordinated and keep getting in each other's way. Not helped by and what makes it even worse is that the PEMs eventually arrive, and Janet and Hope ends up picking up all the Scots and all the troubles they're going through on her comm link, and so she tries to fly in after her, which causes her to start splitting up too, though she tries being more laser focused to just ignore all of her other selves and just keep flying closer. And in the meantime, though, things do get more and more hectic as the Scots end up growing so much to the point where they actually start piling on top of our Scott, to the point where he almost can't do anything. However, he does manage to get some last-minute inspiration as Cassie ends up getting a hold of the communicator and just starts pleading with her dad to come home, to come back. She loves him, and she misses him. And while the real Scott is the only one with an actually working communicator, the other Scots do end up hearing Cassie's pleading over it, and immediately all of them just stop getting in each other's way, and actually start helping the main Scott up, because no matter the scenario, no matter the circumstance, Scott Lang loves his daughter and will do anything for her. And so this gives all the Scots the vigor to work together and actually help their main counterpart up, as they all form like a giant human tower, which he climbs up to get to the core, which I like that. I love that scene. It's a really good one and one of my favorites. But unfortunately, even when he gets to the top of the tower, when he tries throwing one of his discs at the core to try and get it to shrink down, it ends up just fizzling out, and sadly, while the Tower of Scots is doing their best, it's still a human tower and it's clearly not having a strong foundation, and after the plan fails, they all end up losing all the Scots end up losing their footing and nearly fall over. Thankfully, this is when Hope flies in and grabs Scott, and them together manages to somehow suck all their probable selves back into their main bodies, and so they both end up working together and shoot the core with all the shrinking grenades, to the point where eventually it manages to finally shrink back together into a complete core, getting them out of all the timey-wimey shenanigans and restoring the core back to its normal self. As such, Janet ends up coming in and tells them they need to get away, but Scott informs them that Kang has Cassie, so they need to think of a plan to save her. But unfortunately, before they can do that, well, that's when Kang arrives to collect what he was promised. And while Scott asks him, "Where's my daughter? You promised to return her safely," Kang's only response is, "She'll be better off without you." takes the core and, well, just knocks Scott. And when Scott and Hope try to fly in to fight him, he just flicks them aside like they're nothing. And as such, he opens a portal back to his base and just takes Janet with him. So yeah, everything's kind of going to hell. That's not helped by the fact that when Hank is on standby waiting for everyone to get back, MODOK goes to meet him and destroys the ship because MODOK hates Hank as much as he hates Scott. So, overall, today's been a bit of a bummer. However, back at Kang's base, when Cassie is being led back to her cell, she manages to escape by using one of those shrinking grenades which I think she either uses on the guard or on herself. I was writing notes during that scene, so I missed it the second time. But it does allow her to escape, which does make me wonder why she didn't use them earlier. But whatever, we'll get to that when we get to that. And so she decides that she needs to fight back as she immediately goes down to the cells and frees that warrior woman from that commune that found her and her dad. And after getting her out of their cell, they immediately begin forming a plan to try and take Kang down, as pretty much what they want to do is they want to get a message out to everyone on the outside that they are in his stronghold, and that they need to fight back and take Kang down, while below ground they need to free the remaining warriors. So they begin working together trying to do this, but in the meantime, Kang does bring Janet back to his throne room and does explain to her about how he is doing all this because he wants to essentially win the war, stop his alternate selves, and pretty much ensure peace across the multiverse. And yeah, Janet thinks this is a load, that really all he's doing is just conquering people and claiming it's in the name of justice and so forth. And Kang, well, he's clearly heard that she doesn't understand and so forth, but it turns out that the thing is, because he has conquered the quantum realm so much, he now has an army at his disposal. So once he gets out of the quantum realm, he's ready to just pick up right where he left off, but with a big fighting force behind him. So that's not going to go well. But thankfully, back with our other heroes, Scott, Hope, and Hank are actually saved by the super intelligent ants. Yeah, that's something I've neglected to mention. Throughout Hank's time in the quantum realm, his hearing aid was picking up weird signals that he initially thought was just malfunctions. Well, it turns out he was picking up on his ants. It turns out when they got shrunken down to the quantum realm, they wound up getting screwed in time. They wound up going nuts in time, as from their perspective, they wound up living 1,000 years over the span of a day. And in that 1,000 years, they managed to evolve into this technologically advanced civilization. And since they still respond to Hank's commands, well, they now have an army of super strong, super intelligent ants at their disposal, who immediately begin repairing Hank's ship and get them ready to go and get the trio on their way to go and save Cassie and Janet. And as such, while Kang is preparing to get his army out of the quantum realm and conquer entire realities again, Cassie manages to hijack this big speech he's making, which he makes with a big hologram, to send out the message that he's vulnerable, he can't take us all on, yada yada yada, yada yada yada, and ultimately ends the speech by stating that her dad inspired her and she wants to keep fighting. I didn't write down the line. I really should have. Actually, I think I did write down the line. Let me see if I can find it. Hold on. Oh, I know. I did not. I did not write it, but it was a good line. I should really have written it down. The point is she inspires everyone and she wants to keep fighting because that's what her dad inspired her to do. So it's actually really nice and sweet, but ultimately Scott, Hope, and Hank see this, and so they end up launching their own attack as Scott ends up flying in and he ends up growing and pretty much calling Kang out, telling him, "We had a deal. Where's my daughter?" And so he just starts stomping his way into the city. And Kang, well, he's not happy with all the interruptions, so he ends up telling his forces to go take down to take down Ant-Man, well, he tells MODOK to go and take care of Cassie, which MODOK does happily as he confronts Cassie while she and the lady from the from the commune end up freeing more of the people. And so Cassie ends up getting chased around the entire facility by MODOK, but eventually she manages to turn things on her. But eventually she does manage to turn things in her favor as she manages to use one of the grenades to make herself grow and just pretty much swing him around like a rag doll. It's really funny. It's really fun, but she does manage to beat him. And so after he makes this big speech about how she should finish him off and all that nice stuff, Cassie finally just calls him out on all his crap and says, "Just please stop being a dick." And he's like, "I don't know how. I'm already a dick. I don't know what to do. Tell me what to do. It's too late for me." And her response is, and I'm using this in the description of this video and you can't stop me, she tells him, "It's never too late to stop being a dick." True words never spoken. Beautiful. But anyway, after that little thing, while that's all going on, Scott keeps trying to fight through more of Kang's forces, and while Janet's able to provide some air support, sadly the forces are too much, and they start overwhelming the pair. But thankfully, that's when backup arrives flying in their own ships, as they all start flying in and start taking down Kang's forces one by one. And as such, Scott keeps trying to get closer and closer, but at this point, Kang realizes that it's probably best to just run now while everyone's distracted. And so he gets the engine running, and because his ship is now connected to his citadel, it begins covering the whole ship in all these weird rings that are supposed to be able to transport them out of the quantum realm. But Scott starts little by little kind of screwing with everything as he manages to at first use one of Kang's ships to try and stop one of the rings which does fail, but he manages to actually stop them for good as he shrinks down so that he's in Janet's hand. She chucks him at the rings and he ends up growing to giant size in mid-flight and slamming right into it. The momentum of the force knocking the rings aside and stopping the temporal shifting. So, Kang's kind of dead in the water, and more of his forces are being overtaken by these rebels. As such, Kang finally says, "Screw this," and he goes in to try and take care of everything himself. And the instant he arrives, he just starts taking out people one by one, as he gets his technology on, and he just starts blasting with lasers, redirecting the lasers from that guy with a laser for a head, and on top of that, part of his lasers can actually erase people from existence, so that's lovely. And pretty much, he just sees Scott as a non-threat at this point, because he's Kang the Conqueror. He has fought the Avengers across multiple timelines and killed them in every one. And what's Scott do? He can just talk to ants. But ultimately, that kind of becomes his undoing, as Hank arrives with an entire legion of ants. I don't mean like an army, I mean a legion, as they start actually overtaking parts of the city, and it's kind of fucking awesome and so goddamn stupid. It's great. I love it. I just love it. And while Kang is able to put up a force field to keep the ants from getting to him, ultimately that force field fails as MODOK comes flying in, yelling out that his name is Darren Cross and he's not a dick, before managing to short out Kang's force field and allowing the ants to get at Kang and start ripping apart his armor bit one by one until eventually he's presumed dead. Unfortunately, the feedback from Kang's force field and the shock does end up fatally wounding MODOK, and he does end up dying in a very comical, very over-the-top fashion. But seemingly the day is won. Kang's forces have been halted. His plan has been stopped. He's been knocked off from his seat of power. Everything's all good. And Janet, who is now alone in the throne room because when Scott slammed into the ring, it also wound up messing with the throne. Also knocked on all the guards and scientists in the throne room. It allowed Janet to gain access to the controls, and she's now managed and she's getting a gateway open to get everybody back to Earth. So, as such, Scott and Co. manage to get back to the throne room, and they all just start going through one by one until eventually it's just Scott and Cassie. But just as Cassie's about to go through, Scott sees something there, and he pushes her through the portal, narrowly missing a blast from one of Kang's rays. Which, He's still alive, though his suit is severely damaged. And sadly, that blast is the last thing he can accomplish. And, well, the gateway is right there. So Kang decides to go screw it and tries to make a mad dash for it, which leads to a very brutal hand-to-hand fight scene between him and Scott as they're just duking it out one by one, throwing fists at each other, just Kang brutalizing him as he tries slamming him into the ground, breaks his helmet. Scott manages to parry and dodge. It's really a brutal fight scene, especially how personal it is. And in the middle of it all, Kang starts ranting to Scott, I want you to remember, you could have gone home, you could have seen your daughter again, but you just had to win. And Scott's response is, I don't need to win, I just have to make sure we both lose. And in the midst of the battle, he wound up getting knocked next to the core again, and he decides to do what Janet did. Only with a bit more spice, as he throws a bunch of pin particle grenades into the core, but he puts in both varieties of them, big, shrinking, and growing, and once they're exposed to the core, it starts causing it to start going nuts, and as such, the Pims and Cassie see that Scott's having a hard time with Kang, and unfortunately in the midst of the battle, Scott did get knocked aside and he's kind of down for the count, and so Kang does try to make one more mad dash to get out of here, only for Hope to fly in and just start blasting him one by one until eventually, in the midst of all his fighting, he ends up getting knocked into the core, and because it's kind of imploding on itself, he ends up getting pulled into the frenzy and essentially gets sucked into the core just as it explodes. So, yeah, Kang's dead, and the power source of the portal is cut off. So Hope and Scott are seemingly trapped there again. But they do end up finding solace in each other as they both start hugging each other, are thankful the other is there, and they're just happy that they came in one piece and that they're not alone. But and in the end, they do manage to get free because Cassie managed to zero in on their coordinates, and from there, that's it. The day is saved. The good guys won in the end. Kang was stopped, and the quantum realm was freed. And so after Scott and Hope leave, we get our happy ending as Scott returns back to his everyday life, so continues enjoying the fame that he loves so much. He goes back to the coffee shop, and the guy at the coffee shop remembered that he was Ant-Man and starts charging him full price for the coffee. He ends up going back to Baskin Robbins to get a cake for his ends up getting a cake, and the guy running the place made it himself, and it was apparently shit. And he and his family go and celebrate Cassie's birthday, even though it's not actually her birthday, but hey, in Scott's own words, he missed a few, so this is to make up for it. So everything's all hunky-dory, nice and sweet, and all nice. But Scott's got some lingering feelings, as he remembered that Kang talked about that there was other threats out there, and that if he didn't get out, then those things would be coming. That there was an even bigger threat on the horizon, and that he was the only one that could stop it. And when Scott starts realizing this, he starts wondering, did I kill everyone? Is everybody doomed? And eventually he does kind of talk himself down. It's like, no, I'm sure everything's fine. I'm sure everything will be fine. But it's clearly still nagging at him. And as the film ends with him at Cassie's unbirthday party and taking a bite of rancid cake, we get our after credits scenes. Both of which involve Kang, as the first one takes place in an arena that is slowly filling up with Kangs, and in the tallest most room of the arena, we see three variants of the character. One who looks like he's from ancient Egypt, one who looks like he's more cybernetics, and one who looks like he's more of an ancient deity. And all three of them are talking to each other about how the exiled one was defeated, and so they're wondering, well, who killed him? Who among us did it? And they say, none of them did. None of us did. So it's like, it was one of them. They are finally starting to touch the multiverse, and I think it's time we start getting involved. At which point, they start walking around, and one of the other Kangs says, well, how many of us did you call? And the one in charge says, all of them. At which point, the camera pans back to the arena, and as we see all the other Kangs just cheering and all getting ready to start their own invasion. So, yeah, that's kind of a bad thing. But that's where our second one comes in, as this one actually does tie once again in to the Loki series, as we end up as we see this little sideshow presentation for a man by the name of Dr. Wesley Timely. I think that was his name. No, William Timely, who talks about time, who's making a presentation about time and its cyclical nature. And it's here we actually see what the OG Kang looks like. And apparently he has poofy hair. He has poofy hair and glasses. And in the audience of his presentation, we can see Loki and Mobius watching him. And Mobius is like, is this the guy? He made it sound like he was a big intimidating figure. And Loki's response is, he is. Clearly with fear in his eyes. But, yeah. That's where the film ends. That's how everything goes. So, what are my thoughts on Quantumania? I'm going to say this right now. I think the film is stupid. But it's the good kind of stupid. Like, let me put it this way. Remember, for anyone who's watched my vlogs for a long time, remember my thoughts on the classic Ben 10 series? How I thought it was stupid, but creatively so, that the creators clearly knew what they were doing with it, and because they were aware of the kind of dumber aspects, they're able to kind of have fun with them. Hold on one second. Again, dog stuff. But anyway, like I was saying, the creators of the classic Ben 10 knew it felt like they knew exactly what they were doing with it. They knew what they were doing was kind of dumb, but because they were aware of it, they allowed them to embrace that, and from that do some very creative stuff. Actually, really get into the whole the cheesy superhero angle and just go nuts with it. And because they accepted it, it allowed them to create some very genuinely interesting things. It allowed them to actually create some creative setups, creative villains, creative characters, creative action. It actually led to a very fun and interesting series. And I kind of put Quantumania in that same level of insane, stupid, silly fun. As it feels like the film feels dumb, but it feels like that the people behind the movie were aware of this fact, and because they were aware of this fact, it allowed them to do whatever they want with it without pushing it. And that's actually what I think works about the movie. That it's stupid, but it's fun. It's the good kind of stupid. It's the creative stupid. The kind that where they clearly said, yep, we know this is dumb, but we're going to have fun with it anyway. And that's clearly what they did. And the thing is, to compare this to another MCU project, let's go to Thor: Love and Thunder. And while I still kind of like Love and Thunder, that is one of the examples where it feels like the film is stupid, but it's not aware that it's stupid. As that film, it felt like it was trying to be fun and zany and all over the place, but as a result, because they kept pushing it, eventually just things kind of fell on their head. And while I don't hate Love and Thunder, that it is one of those films that I will openly admit has a lot of problems, and sadly, that was one of the problems, as it kind of tried packing on so much dumb that it really felt like it was collapsing in on itself. Whereas with Quantumania, it feels like they are aware of what they're doing, and so because of that, it allows them to temper what they can and can't get away with. It allows them to focus on what they know they should be focusing on, while still taking the dumber aspects and just going nuts with them over here to essentially build everything up. And it works perfectly, in my opinion. Again, in my opinion. If you disagree with me, more power to you, but this is just my thoughts. But it allows, and to kind of talk about that, one of the things that I think encapsulates this is MODOK. MODOK is one of those characters that I feel, like I said, is just a mix between genuine threat and kind of stupid. And honestly, I think he works throughout the movie. There's a bit there, because throughout the film, he does feel like he is a killing machine. That he is something that you do not want to cross. That to get in his way is to invite death. And because of that, the characters are constant. Whenever he's on screen, you know that you're in danger. But at the same time, he's a big floating head with stubby arms and legs. And there is a constant running gag throughout the movie that once the main characters realize who he is, they're like, Darren, what the hell happened to you? And it's usually while he's in the middle of a villainous speech or something, or trying to throw things in his face. And again, fitting with his previous appearance in the MCU when he was Yellow Jacket, he's petty up the wazoo. He is just constantly arrogant and full of himself, and it works. I think it genuinely works. Even his final scenes when he fights Cassie, when Cassie goes up to him and tells him, "It's never too late to stop being a dick." Like, they know. They friggin' know. They know that this guy is stupid. They are aware that this guy is not to be taken that seriously. Especially since his battle cry, when he decides to spontaneously change sides, is, "My name is Darren Cross and I am not a dick." Like, seriously. That is so stupid. Even his death scene is played up, and it's amazing. It's great. Like, he says, "Scott, I always saw you like a brother," and he's like, "Seriously?" And when he starts touching Scott's face, he's like, yeah. It's like, "At least I died. He said, had a good death, and I die as an Avenger." It's like, and Scott's like, yeah, you're an Avenger. You're in. It's just like, they do not take it seriously. But at the same time, he's still a genuine threat throughout the movie. Because, like I said, you have this bottled up, petty, smarmy child in this literal killing machine. It makes him much more scary because anything can set him off. Anything can get you on his bad side. The only person that's pretty much does not have to fear anything from MODOK is Kang, and that's only because Kang's power outclasses his. And so anytime MODOK does something that annoys him, he can just throw him into a wall with just the flick of his finger and start crushing him with just a thought. Hell, in one scene he actually does that and tells him, "Don't speak while I'm in the same room." And he even compares MODOK to Janet, how Janet didn't talk and was actually more helpful than he was. Like, again, it works. It genuinely works. And I feel MODOK is a good example of that. But throughout the whole movie, that creative stupidity still comes in some very nice ways. When you see how more of the quantum realm works, when you see Hank commenting on how, this changes our views on evolution, on everything, and that guy looks like, holy shit, that guy looks like broccoli. Like, okay. Then you got scenes where Hank has to fly around the ship, and the interface are these weird, gooey arm things or whatever, and he's just clearly grossed out by it. Or when you learn the ants are now back, and Hank's like, and you just see all the ants, and Hank's talking about them and talking about how civilized they are and getting off topic. It's just clearly meant to not be taken seriously. There are some things in there that are clearly not meant to be, they're just there to be fun. And unlike Love and Thunder, which kept pushing it to the point where it felt like no one took anything seriously, there is still enough stake from the main characters that you can take this seriously. That you can actually believe that they're in the midst of all this. That you can actually believe that they have stakes in the matter. And one of those things that helps push it is Kang himself. Kang, I think, is a great villain. I do have my problems with him in certain areas, but I'll go over them when I start talking about the flaws of the movie. But as a character, Kang more than works. And one of the things that was talked about in interviews in the build-up for this movie was how the actor was Kang's actor, who also played He Who Remains, because they're both variants of each other. They talk about how Kang was not meant to be He Who Remains. They're both like two different characters, despite also being the same guy. And there are ways that you can tell they are the same person, but they are very distinct. But they're also two different distinct characters. One of the ways that I think links them, and one of the ways that I think makes Kang legitimately threatening, is that he feels like a normal guy. He feels like someone that you can just chat with and spend some time along, maybe enjoy yourself, have a pleasant conversation with. And that was kind of carried over between He Who Remains and Kang, as both of these are guys who are conquerors, who have taken over entire realities, who have shaped the courses of history, and they're just like regular average guys who one guy offers the main characters a seat in front of of his desk, offering them tea and snacks, while the other guy is someone that you can just sit down and have a pleasant conversation with. But they both have very different demeanors in that regard. He Who Remains felt like a guy who was just always excitable, like he was very much teetering on the edge of sanity, as basically his position as the head of the TVA and the one controlling the fate of the multiverse pretty much had gotten him to the point where he was just barely holding on. Whereas Kang, he knows what he is, but he feels he has no choice. To kind of go into that whole every villain is the hero of their own story thing, Kang genuinely believes that him being a conqueror, having to go out and destroy entire realities to ensure that his other selves don't could disrupt the order of the multiverse, he comes across as someone who feels like he has no choice. That in another life he was a good man. He wants to do good, and you see that side coming out at various points in the movie. When he and Janet are talking in the flash, when Janet is telling her story, you can tell he's being genuinely open with her. And when he talks to her about how they'll get out of here and she'll see her daughter again, he means it. He genuinely means that it's clear he's telling her the truth, or at the very least, he does want to help her see hope again. He does want to send her home, and when she does learn who he is, he's like, Janet, I promised. I would bring you home, and you can see your daughter again. And he acts on it, but when she starts questioning about what he's doing, he's honest with her. And when she sees what he is, she asks, who is Kang? His only response is, it's who I have to be. It's clear that, in a way, he does not enjoy what he is. He does not like that he has to be the villain. But he feels he has no choice. That in order to face his doppelgangers on an even playing field, he needs to be this thing. He needs to be the monster, because only by being the monster will he truly be the hero, so to speak. Only by being the bad guy will he stop the bigger threat, which I think is very interesting in that regard. And seeing that kind of character complexity in there really works, because it's clear he's not just conquering because, oh, I deserve it, though there is clearly some arrogance behind his actions, as he feels the only way to save the multiverse is to prune out all the bad strips and get rid of the other psychos with future technology. But at the same time, you do see the heart of a man in there, a man who genuinely keeps telling himself, I have to do it, and if I don't, someone else will, and they won't be me. You can tell, and hell, there's even one scene that I think that there are scenes that really do work. It's when you see the man behind I guess I can say mask. He doesn't really wear a mask, but behind the suit, I guess. When he learns that when he goes to confront Scott, and he mentions how he knows Janet, Scott, of course, asks, well, wait, how do you know Janet? Does everyone know Janet? And then he looks genuinely hurt that Janet never mentioned him. Before he says, I guess that makes sense. And then when he actually confronts Janet, he actually does ask her, what did you see when you went in my head? What made you turn against me? And so on and so forth. And in the end, and even at points when it looks like his plans almost fail, you can see how hurt he is. Like, he feels like, no. Like, he desperately it wasn't just, I have to make this happen because I'm the big bad. No, he felt like that this needed to succeed. And when things start going wrong, it hurts him, because it feels like, because in his mind, this means that the universe is being stripped of its only greatest hope. Which, yeah, is arrogance incarnate when it comes to Kang. But in this case, you can genuinely see that there is the heart of a man who wants to do good, who thinks he's doing good. It's just he's a psychotic nutball. But by that same token, because you can see the heart of that man beneath, it also makes him much more cunning. Because, going back to what Krylar said, he can be very persuasive. And you see that in these interactions. He's very calm and demure when interacting with people. He's not just, I'm in the room right now, listen to me. Except with MODOK, but that's a different thing altogether. He actually does talk with the people. He actually does listen to them. It feels like he actually is having a conversation with them. And in a way, I can kind of see how a person like this could be a future conqueror. Because, well, he is that charismatic. He is that stoic. When going back to his friendship with Janet, he genuinely treated her like a friend. He listened to her. He opened up with her. He didn't tell her everything, but he did tell her aspects of his life and shared stuff with her. He genuinely did convince her, I'm on your side and I want what's best for you. The only reason that stopped working was when Janet saw the monster behind the man. And thus, likewise, when he meets Scott, he actually does talk with him and does try going a more peaceful route. He does try telling him, look, Scott, I have this thing that I need you to get. And if I can get it, I not only can leave this place, but I can get you out of here. It basically just feels like him just rationalizing with Scott, like he's a friend who just wants to help. But of course, and the only time you see, and what makes it better is that because he's this calm and demure, when he snaps, it feels scary. Because when he snaps, he's just that calm and demure. When Scott tells him no, he just calmly tells him, I'm gonna kill your daughter right in front of you. I'm gonna make you relive it over and over. When he knocks MODOK aside, it's very clear. You can hear the harmful intent in his tone, but it's also very nonchalant. Like he knows he's already gonna win this. He knows he's already got the upper hand. He just needs to remind you that you are. He knows he just needs to remind you that you are lesser than him. It's genuinely creepy, and because of that, when things do start going wrong for him and he does start getting angry, you can see the frustration, you can see the anger building up when he finally has this confrontation with Ant-Man, telling him it's like, do you think this is all new to me? I have conquered realities. I have faced rebellions, and I've fought the Avengers multiple times, and they've all died, yet here I remain. I am Kang. You're just a man who can talk to ants. It's very, like, you can just see, like, there is still some grandiosity to him, and I think that's what makes him work. He feels like a very complex villain, but he also works so well because he feels like a man who thinks he has no choice, and who has let himself become a monster because in his own mind it's for the greater good. That if he doesn't do it, then even greater evil is going to come, all of which are him. But it really works, and I think it makes for a genuinely fantastic first outing for Kang the Conqueror as Kang the Conqueror. So yeah, I'll give it that. I like him. I like Kang. On top of that, another aspect that I think that makes the film worth it is, of course, the characters, the dynamic between them all, the heart of it all. We get, of course, the follow-up with the Pyms as they talk to Janet and want to learn about her time in the quantum realm, and you see Janet just kind of dealing with the guilt of unintentionally helping Kang free himself while also trying to make up for her mistakes. The fear in her eyes, her trying to explain herself to her daughter and husband about what she's done, and afraid that if they know, they'll reject her. But at the end of the day, they do sympathize with her and say, look, we understand, we know what you did was a mistake, but it doesn't matter anymore. We just need to get out of here. It's actually really nice, but of course there's also the connection with Scott and his daughter, because, well, it's a good connection. Again, because Scott missed so much time with his daughter, he's desperate to hold on to her even more. And Cassie, well, while I don't fully agree with how she disagrees with her father, the disconnect between them does feel very real. Because, well, she saw her father as a hero, as a superhero, and yet after he helped the Avengers defeat Thanos, he just kind of stopped. And while I understand why. He's done this big thing. I think let him enjoy the fruits of his labor for a while before he's needed again. At the same time, because she's a kid who desperately wants to follow in Daddy's footsteps, she's trying her best she's trying her best. It's only, well, unfortunately, because she's still a kid, she's naive. She doesn't think things through. She jumps into situations head first, not really understanding the consequences of them. And unfortunately, over the course of the movie, that does come back to bite her, as it's because of her actions that Scott and co got pulled into the quantum realm. It's because of her actions that they got captured by Kang, and it's ultimately her realizing that being a hero isn't just running in and with good intentions. there is more nuance that needs to be had. And as a result, she does. As a result, when the consequences of her actions do start affecting the people she loves, she feels genuine guilt. But by the end, the bond that Scott and his daughter have is just sweet. I love it. And by the end, no matter what she does, no matter how much they disagree, Scott's love for Cassie never dies. He's always there for her. He's quick to bail her out of jail, and while he does chew her out, he's proud of her for wanting to do good. He's proud of her for wanting to build all these machines to help others. When he sees that she's got her own suit, he gives her pointers on how to best use it. When he's trapped, and when he's in the probability storm and his other selves are having trouble coordinating, all it takes is Cassie begging with him, pleading with him to just come back, and all the Scotts stop fighting and they all start working together. Honestly, that is one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie. Just seeing the Legion of Scotts actually realizing, wait, is that Cassie? Oh yeah, we need to do this for her. Come on, get up there, man, get up there. It's like they realize they can't be the hero here. It's about Cassie. This is about their daughter. No matter what shit they're doing, no matter what they're going through, it's all for her. And it's sweet, it's kind, it's amazing, it's wholesome, and it gets me right here every time. And by the end of the movie, when Scott is just so pissed at Kang for trying to hurt his daughter, for still holding on to his daughter, or when he finally reunites with her, it's just the sweetest thing. But again, on top of that, you're also seeing the same thing with Scott and Hope. While they don't have any relationship issues in this movie, which I'm okay with, at the very least, when they actually do reunite and they're fighting side by side, you can see just the strength of their bond. They're ready to go to hell and back for each other. They're willing to do whatever it takes to keep the other safe. And it really does reflect in all of this. And it makes it for a very nice and a very sweet movie that makes you just feel all warm and fuzzy when it does those sort of things. And of course, there is still the creativity with the worlds of the quantum realm. I genuinely think the action is still kick ass, and I do still love watching it, especially in regards to the shrinking and growing, and of course, just how weird and zany things can be. So I actually think this movie, so in that regard, I think it works. And as an adventure movie, it is cool seeing these characters exploring all these different realms with each other, seeing all the weirdness and surreal nature of what they're going through, and it does make for just a fun adventure movie, a very fun family adventure movie. But with that being said, do I think it's perfect? Nah, there are still some problems I have with it One thing, while I like Kang, I think he suffers from a bit of show don't tell in the movie. Because while I do like him as an imposing villain, and I can buy that he could be a conqueror, well, we're never really shown how quickly he conquered the quantum realm. And sadly, I think that would have been nice to at least just kind of check in on. Because, well, it's a bit of show don't tell in that regard. Like, we see him conquer the quantum realm. We're told he's destroyed entire realities. Well, okay, we actually do kind of see that through the memories. But when we actually see him controlling the quantum realm, well, he's already in charge, and so the struggles are already over. Most of the grunt work is done by his men, and any work he does is usually just flicking his fingers and opening portals and so forth. So it doesn't really feel that imposing as a physical force. Of course, especially since near the end of the movie, when he finally does go into action, the extent of his abilities is firing a few lasers, redirecting a laser, putting up a force field, and that's it. That is the extent of his abilities. I feel like that all I have to do is throw enough guys at him, and he would eventually get Zerg rushed. Again, I can see how he could be a conqueror because he does have the gift of gab, and he does feel like a very charismatic person that you can talk to, and even if you couldn't, he has enough capabilities, he has enough at his disposal that he could be a legitimate threat to anyone else. But at the same time, I feel like it would have been benefiting more if we did get that. And while I do like some of the sillier aspects of the movie, sometimes it could maybe get a little too silly in some regards, because while I like MODOK, maybe there could have been times when maybe he couldn't have been as focused on as much. But I think, and of course, the effects can sometimes be cheesy in some regards. Of course, there are even some things in there that really just are a little annoying. Like again, going with Cassie and her and her grenade, her and the grenades. Like, why couldn't she use those earlier? Why not? Why couldn't Scott have used them earlier? That would have helped a lot. Shrink down the guards and bada bing bada boom, run around. I think it would have helped a lot if they had used those more often. Why didn't they use them? It was weird in that regard. So yeah, there are some problems with the film that are kind of annoying. That Kang's whole thing could have been show don't tell, and I guess another thing, Cassie was a little annoying. I understand that part. Like I said, part of her arc was her kind of learning the ramifications that being a hero. That sometimes it's not just going into being a hero, but you got to actually know the circumstances. And she was inexperienced in that regard. But with that, but and on top of that, I kind of wonder why get some big names like why would get a big name like Bill Murray if he was just gonna be in like one scene. I wonder how much that actually cost them to get him in there. But I mean, he's acted well, but still, it just feels weird. But in that regard, I can kind of see why some people wouldn't like this movie, as sometimes it does feel like it can be a little too silly for its own good. And again, the whole stuff with Kang is a bit show don't tell, as it feels like they're trying to build him up as this big bad villain, and yet it just feels like they're building the groundwork for him. So, yeah, I'm gonna kind of maybe knock that against the movie as well. And on top of that, it does feel a little rushed in the beginning, as we only get like the brief drive-by version of what Scott's been up to before they rush into the action and so forth. So that kind of thing can be annoying in some regards. And of course, like I said, the effects are kind of cheesy. You can clearly tell when characters are being superimposed over stuff, and it can be a little distracting in that regard. But with that being said, it doesn't ruin the movie for me. I do think that it is still a creative and fun movie. It's great. It just feels like a great family adventure movie. We're having all these people go to a strange and zany place, exploring all the oddities and surrealness of it, while also facing a grand threat, exploring all these new areas, and just having a very heartfelt adventure between family that's ultimately just trying to that while also trying to get home is also seeing this nice and unique place. It can be silly in that regard, but with that silliness comes creativity. As we get some very unique as we get some very unique setups, some unique designs for the denizens of the quantum realm, the various areas of the quantum realm, and overall, and of course, combine that with honestly good villains, some good humor in many regards, and overall, I think Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania is a silly, dumb, but overall fun movie. It's not perfect, it's not great, but on its whole, I think it is a very fun movie. Just one of those films that you could pop on and just enjoy. Think of it like a roller coaster that you can just go on there and not think and just throw your hands in the air and just have fun. So, yeah, that's just my thoughts on the film. So, yeah, again, if you don't agree with me and you think the movie's trash, that's fine. That's perfectly valid. But I personally enjoy it, and I think once it comes out on DVD, I'll be more than happy to add it to my collection and continue enjoying it there too. So, yeah, I think that's about it. Thank you for watching. I'm Samuel Johnson, and while next week we shall be going back to Steven Universe, the next time we venture back into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I think it's time we check back in with our favorite band of galactic misfits as we take a look at Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3.